Hello, everyone. We will hang on just a little bit longer here and give people a chance to join. Can everyone hear me okay? Either give like a thumbs up or no, I see someone nodding. Yes, thank you, Emma. Awesome. We'll wait just one more minute and give people time to join. Thank you all for being here. All right. People might continue to trickle in, and that's fine. I just want to make sure no one's waiting in the waiting room here. I think we're all good to get started. So first of all, just a couple housekeeping things. Everybody who's attending this webinar is going to be muted. In the past, typically, if people have questions, we've been utilizing the chat feature. So as questions arise, go ahead and put them in the chat, and Megan graciously gives time at the end to answer as much as she can. Um, and there's also the hand raise feature. If you prefer to talk in person, I can always unmute you manually. Another housekeeping thing, if you are in need of a certificate after the webinar, go ahead and email me afterwards. I'll put my email in the chat for anybody who needs that. When you joined, you probably got a notification that this webinar is being recorded, so there will be a recording available afterwards as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce our amazing presenter for today. Megan is a licensed professional counselor, a registered play therapist. She is the founder of Time for a Change Counseling, and she is the author of The Heart of the Matter. So I'm going to give it over to her, and anybody who's having technical issues, I will help in the chat. So go ahead, Megan.
Hey, welcome everybody. So as Caitlin said, I am Megan Ham. And so it is 6 o'clock my time on a Wednesday night. So we're gonna make sure I want this to be interactive. So if you have any questions, like you said, feel free to drop them in the chat. And my goal is to be able to answer them as we go. But also at the end, we do have time for question and answer. So if there are any questions that you want to hold to the end, feel free to do that as well. And so I want us to start with a question that might hit close to home for some of us. I want you to think about what behavior that you experience with a child, either you're a child or a foster child or an adoptive child or a child in the family, that is just the hardest for you to respond to. I mean, the behavior that makes you either freeze, either makes you lose your cool, or feel like walking away. Take a moment and name it. Because what happens is when we name it, we begin to take our power back from that behavior. And so you can drop it in the chat, or we can drop them in the chat, or you can, because I know Caitlin will have to unmute you. So let's see in the chat. What are the behaviors feel hardest to respond to? Screaming and whining, screeching. I'm guessing it's like hollering, what we call hollering down here in the South. Spitting, of course, spitting. Fighting, hitting and kicking, defiance. Okay, we got a good mixture of different things. Doing something right after being told not to, biting, swearing at their parents, those things. And so thank you so much for sharing that. And so I want you to think about those behaviors as we go through this presentation tonight. It is a part where we're going to be interacting with each other and like having conversation about it. But I want you to keep in mind that behavior. And if another one comes up, feel free to keep that one as well. Now, I know I did give, you received an email with a worksheet If you were able to print the worksheet off, that is perfect and you can follow along. If you didn't get the printed off, that's okay too. If you'll just have it when we get to that part so that you can follow along with us as we go through the worksheet. But it's not mandatory, but it'll help you follow along. So definitely think about that. And so as we go through, we have that behavior that we're talking about. And so what tonight we're going to talk about no more guessing games. How do we handle those meltdowns with compassion? And I don't want to give you the information of all of the things to do before the meltdown or all the things to do after the meltdown. I want us to talk about in the moment when the meltdown is happening, because all of those behaviors that you named are behaviors that occur. They're behaviors that we see, and I want us to be able to reframe it and think about it as when I say meltdown, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the spitting, the fighting, the hitting and kicking, the defiance. Doing things that you told them repeatedly not to do. All of those things is what when I say meltdown, that's the thing that I'm talking about. Okay? So who is this for? This training, when we talk about handling meltdowns with compassion, this isn't just a training for caregivers, or for people who feel like who are at their limit or at their wits end. I can remember the first time, the first presentation I ever did for parents, the title of it was getting your last nerve back. Anybody ever say, "Oh, this child just get on my last nerve," right? And so the goal was, well, how do we get that last nerve back so that they won't get on it and then we don't have any nerves left? So this is for foster and adoptive parents. It's also for those who work with children and say, "Hey, nothing works. I've tried everything. I've tried all the interventions. I've tried the sticker charts, behavior modification. I've tried, rewards and consequences, and nothing seems to work." But also anyone who's ready to respond to the behavior and not just react to it. Somebody who wants to be in control of how they're responding and things that are happening. Another one, those who foster and adoptive parents say, "Hey, I opened my home and my heart up to these children or this child, and I don't want to give up on them, but it's getting really, really hard to deal with the behaviors over and over again." Also, caregivers who are feeling overwhelmed and burnt out. And also people who just say, "I just want some peace. I want to be able to come home from work after a long day and not have to continuously go over and over some behaviors or dealing with behaviors that somebody's having. I want to be able to say, hey, go clean your room," and they go clean their room. Right? What would a night look like in your home if you told somebody to go take a bath and they just went and ran their water and took a bath? Like, those are the things that we want to be able to try to put back and get some peace inside our homes and inside our lives. So who am I? I am Megan Ham, a licensed professional counselor, registered play therapist, and I'm also a foster to adoptive mom. And when I was behavior modification through and through. Like, I thought that my goal was to go in and fix the kid, right? And the reality is, I thought that parents would come to me, school professionals would come to me, and they would say things like, "Hey, this child is dealing with aggression, or this child is dealing with anxiety." And my job was to decrease the aggression, of course. Or my job was to decrease the anxiety, of course. And so that's what I got really, really good at, is putting these plans in place. If they had more anger, I was supposed to decrease it. But what happened was I became a foster parent and I was a therapist. And so in that mixture, as a foster parent, when we were, I feel like I was called to be a foster parent, right? Was called to be a foster parent, had this vision. God told me I should be a foster parent. Had the conversation with my husband. He was like, "Well, God didn't tell me that, but I trust you," right? I trust what he told you. And so we went on the journey to become foster parents. And because I was already a therapist, I was working in mental health. I had been working with kids for years. Everybody told me, "Oh, Megan, you're going to be great. It's going to be fine. You're not going to have any issues." Because when these issues come up, the trauma and the kids being in foster care, you can handle it. Of course, you do this every day at work, you'll do great. And so I was introduced to this young lady who is now my daughter. And they said, "Oh, she's just a little stubborn when it's time to do her homework." Okay, I can handle a little stubborn when it's time to do their homework. And the thing about it was, she was having all of these behaviors, but I was just managing them. I was tired. I was first frustrated. I was burnt out. but I was managing the behavior. And then one night I remember, and her taking a bath was never an issue. Like she was always excited about bath time. And so we made it an event. Like it was like a little spa time actually. She would go, I had all color crayons and all kind of soaps and things because this was the one time I had no issues with her at all. And so we made it an event. So one night where she goes to get in the tub or she runs her water and then when she gets in the tub, she just stands in the tub and she just starts to scream and scream and scream. And I'm like, okay, I can handle this, right? It's just a little trauma response is the thing I'm telling myself. Oh, this is typical behavior. Although this is a behavior I hadn't seen in her, but she just screamed. And no matter what I tried, no matter what intervention, no matter what suggestion, no matter how I got on her level, no matter how I changed my tone, in that moment, I could not stop the screaming. So, of course, I did what any trauma trained therapist, foster parent would do, and I started screaming with her. Standing there in the middle of the bathroom, she's screaming, I'm screaming. And we just screaming. And the thing about it is, when I started screaming, she stopped. Because and I to this day I think that's when she realized this lady may be crazy, right? But what I quickly learned is that my journey as a foster parent, as a therapist to being a foster parent, it really that experience with her changed the way that I even work with children who've been impacted by trauma. Now the basics doesn't change in terms of understanding the trauma response, under being trauma informed, understanding how the brain changes when individuals have been impacted by trauma, understanding that behavior is communication. But what I realized is that kids were not broken so that I can fix them. So it wasn't a child who was dealing with aggressive behavior. It wasn't a broken child who needed to be fixed. I had to change how I dealt with the behavior because they're just trying to survive. And I had to realize that their way of communicating that was through their behavior. And that helped me shift from trying to control the situation, trying to be the person who was modifying their behavior, to being the person who was just connecting to them. And so now that is the work that I do. And honestly, without that experience with my daughter as a foster parent, I probably would not be here in front of you today, because that led to so many other things. And I realized for myself that if I was having that struggle as a licensed professional counselor who was trauma trained and doing all the things, what struggles are other parents having, or what struggles are other foster parents and adoptive parents having who hadn't had all the training that I had? And so that is where we are today. And so now that is the work that I do. I work with individuals who are impacted by trauma, whether it's a child in the system or even the foster parents or the adoptive parents who are trying to help navigate those for their kids. And so that's who I am in a nutshell. And so, what is the problem? The thing is, meltdowns can feel really unpredictable. They can be very exhausting and they can be endless. So, I learned, and it's, I laugh at it now. Wasn't funny in the moment, but I learned I can deal with the yelling and screaming meltdown for about 32 minutes and 30 seconds. At about 32 minutes and 31 seconds, I'm done. All of my everything I learned is out the window, and now I'm in meltdown mode. So the problem is sometimes meltdowns aren't just big feelings, they feel like crisis. They feel like a child that's in crisis, it feels like a caregiver who's in crisis. And the reality is, traditional discipline does not always help. Sometimes the traditional discipline will increase the stress of the adult as well as the child. And so we are sometimes stuck in these meltdown cycles. And caregivers sometimes will either freeze or will feel when we do have that power struggle. If anybody's ever been in a power struggle before, then we start feeling guilty because we're like, okay, maybe I knew better than that, right? And sometimes we'll feel some shame of the way that we handle the meltdowns that are happening. But I want us to take a moment and get really honest. When I talk about meltdowns being unpredictable and exhausting, and I say that they could be difficult for the caregiver, it's not to blame or point fingers or say that you're not doing enough. Or the thing that I absolutely do not like to hear It's when a parent, a foster parent, or a parent says, "This is what I have going on. This is how I responded, and this is what happened." And another professional will say, "Oh, well, maybe you're not being consistent enough." Or they'll say things like, "Well, did you try naming the feeling, or did you jump right into discipline?" The reality is, baby, if this baby been screaming for 33 minutes, I don't want to hear that. I would just be honest with you. As a professional myself, as a parent, if I've been dealing with this meltdown for 33 minutes every day in and day out, simply because I asked you to take a bath, I don't want to hear somebody tell me I'm not being consistent enough. I feel like that's borderline disrespectful, right? Because what are you saying? Because what are you doing? It feels like you're blaming me for the behavior that's happening. And so when we talk about the big problem, I want you to consider the meltdown cycle, but I don't want you to think that this is about what you need to do or what you're not doing enough of, because ultimately it's about all of us learning and growing together. And so, but why does it matter? So when I think about mastering meltdown behavior, because we're talking about meltdown, and meltdown is any behavior that the child is exhibiting that we don't want there, right? So, and some stuff is typical childhood development. We don't get into a lot of that for this presentation, but if you have any questions about it, we can definitely have the conversation. So when I think about mastering meltdowns, the first thing I remember is that behavior is communication, which means that sometimes we'll talk about it as being like a trauma response. But what it means is that when a child is having a meltdown behavior, when the child is screaming and they're being defiant and they are hitting and they're kicking and they're throwing things, they're saying that I have a need that's not being met and I am responding with this behavior, because they may not always have the words to say, "This is too big for me," or "This is too much," or "I don't know how to handle it." And so what we see is we'll see act out behavior. And so when I think about meltdowns, I think about meltdowns in a way of a meltdown is a crisis, right? And so that child is in crisis, which means that there's something going on that they can't control and they need our support. And when a compassion approaches that, understanding that, because the word compassion means to be able identify that a person has an issue and we have the willingness to help support them through that, right? And so we're being compassionate. I know that there's something wrong and I want to be able to support you. Because think about it like this. If somebody comes to you and say, and or you if you have a child that's having a meltdown, and it's the typical bath time meltdown, it could be the one that you go through every day, and they're coming to you and you feel like, if you feel that this child just doesn't want to be told no, you're going to respond a different way than if you feel like, okay, this child is stressed out to the max and they need some help. You're going to respond differently than a child who you just feel like, oh no, they just want to have their way. So I want you to think about it like that. And the other thing is, even when it comes to a meltdown, when it comes to our children, we are only responsible for our responses. We can't control our kids. We can't control our kids' behaviors. We can control our responses and it will influence their behavior, right? A lot of time, especially in our society, whenever something happens, I don't know if it's with y'all too. I don't know if it's with y'all as well, but with me, it used to be whenever something happened, especially that involved a kid, whether it was ongoing suspensions, whether it was, something that got to the news, the first thing that we tend to ask ourselves is, where are the parents? And what are the parents doing? Or if don't get I do not read comments and do not read comments on stories about kids and stuff that happen with kids, because most comments are going to be like, oh, that child just needs a belt and the parents are not involved and all the things. And so I tend not to read those, because I realize that parenting is an important part, but parenting is not, you know it's not the end all be all. Because think about this. We were all 13, 14, 15, 16 before. And there are probably some things that we did then that our parents still don't know about. And they didn't raise us that way. And so we can't put the same thing on the kids. A kid that has a behavior or has a meltdown doesn't mean that there's bad parenting. They could be dysregulated for other reasons. Okay, so I'm not gonna get on this soapbox. So one thing is behavior is communication. I want you to think about the behavior that you talked about, the one that is hard for you to deal with, or that becomes difficult for you. And one, I want you to think about what is the child really saying with their behavior. What do we see? What are we seeing in terms of the behavior versus what is underneath? So I want you to ask yourself, when your child was, or when you parented, or when you were around a baby, a lot of times, if you're around a baby a lot, you will understand when a baby cries, what do we do? Right? Like if a baby just started crying, we're trying to figure out, are they hungry? Are they sleepy? Are they tired? Do they need to be changed? Or do they really just don't fool with the person that they have or that's with them? And what happens is when we get really good, we know our baby's sad cry, we know our baby's hungry cry, we know their diaper needs to be changed cry. We learn those things. But why? Why do we learn that with a baby? Because what happens is we know in our head and in our heart that the baby doesn't have the words to say, I need to be changed. That the baby doesn't have the words to say, I'm still hungry. That the baby doesn't have the words to say, I'm sleepy. And so they will whine and they will cry. What I'm asking you to do today is just because you have a child who is just because you have a child who understands language and knows words, I want you to get just as curious about what's making that behavior come. Right? When you see a meltdown, asking yourself, what is the child trying to say with this behavior? Right? Maybe they're saying I'm scared. Maybe they're saying I don't feel safe. Maybe they're saying I can't hold it together. Maybe they're saying I feel out of control. And only then when we start to look beneath the surface is when we get the reality of what's really going on with them. When we can really impact it, because we can impact that part of what's going on. And so in the mental health field, this is called the behavior iceberg, which means that at the top we see the behaviors, we see the throwing, the hitting, the kicking, and all those things. But underneath, we see the things that are going on, and sometimes the things can be trauma. Sometimes the thing can be their emotions, not understanding their emotions. Sometimes the thing can be stinking thinking or having a negative thought about something that's happened. But what we have to do is we have to get really curious about what that behavior is. Right? And also, when I think about compassion, I think about meltdowns or behavior crisis. This child is in crisis. Think about somebody who would be in an emergency. Let's say if you were around somebody and they, I don't know, you were around somebody and they had a medical emergency, a panic attack, an asthma attack, or something like that. You wouldn't walk up to them and say, hey, stop doing that. Just breathe. Like, stop doing that. Stop doing the thing that you're doing. Because in our minds, we know that they need help. They need support. They're in crisis. And so our job in the moment is not to figure out why they're in crisis. It's to be able to help them get out the crisis. If we know that it's an asthma attack, we're going to give them their pump. If we know that it's some other medical emergency, we're going to call 911. We're going to make them comfortable until 911 gets there. And I want us to be able to do the same thing when it comes to behavior crisis. Because compassion isn't just feeling a certain way, it's how we show up. It's being able to, when somebody else is in a crisis, when they're overwhelmed, that we give them our calm and we choose to connect with them instead of the 50, 11,000 questions that sometimes will come out when we have a child that's having a meltdown. Right. And so I want you to think about that because once we shift that, then we are more open to helping them with the things that are going on for them. And so three shifts that change everything. One is you don't have to attend every meltdown that you're invited to. Right? We in the parenting world, we always say choose your battles and pick your battles. And that's definitely true. Sometimes we have to decide which ones do we need to connect so that we can correct. Which ones are like, okay, that's not something that needs to be addressed every time it happens. And then the other part that we don't always talk about is sometimes it could be developmental. Like this could just be typical behavior for this age group, and it's not something that's pathological or that needs therapy for. right? The second one is our calmness and our regulation is important, and we have to be able to lend them our calm. If you think about an emergency, like we talk about being a crisis, if there's an emergency that's going on, and if you think about it, if I call the ambulance, or if I call the fire department, if I call the police, and when they get to me, they are as stressed out and overwhelmed as I am. If I call the fire department and they see the fire and they start screaming and take off running the other direction, I'm not gonna feel safe. Right? I don't feel like I need to call somebody else. And that's the same thing when our kids are in the behavior crisis. And our priority is the de-escalation. Right? Our priority when the child is in crisis and having a meltdown is not to teach them to do better. Because ultimately, research says that when a child is in meltdown and they're having what we call big behaviors, that the parts of their brain that learns, or even the parts of their brain that makes decision, is offline. It's not working. So teaching them in the moment is not going to support that. It's not it's not landing anywhere, or even giving them so many options. I know one of the things that I honestly, I'm gonna be honest, I used to teach parents is when you are dealing with a child or when things are happening, it's like let them know what the outcome is gonna be. Like, well, if you don't stop this, then this is gonna happen, to give them that. But now research is saying they can't even process that because that part is offline. Like they don't even know what you're saying. They hear you, but they're not processing what you're saying. Right? It says, what happens when we are so deep into this? How long does it take to unlearn how to respond as parents and for the child to shift to understanding too? If I've been reacting for the past 3 years and now the child automatically becomes defensive and opposes everything starting today, if I change as a parent, how long do you think it would take to see a change in behavior? Ultimately, I think when you change as a parent, the part of it is you're changing your behavior, and the way that you are approaching the behavior, it's not really a timeline, because, well, it depends on the child and the situation, right? Because anything that has learned can be unlearned. But there is a process to it. And so I'm not going to tell you that and the first day you go home and you change it, or the first day you go home and you respond differently, that all of a sudden the child's gonna be like, oh, she's doing something new. Because ultimately they're gonna test that limit. They're gonna test it anyway, because they're gonna be like, oh yeah, that maybe she was just in a good mood that day. And so I think it's about, when you think about a compassionate approach, it becomes part of how you see the whole experience, and not just when you're dealing with a meltdown. Because there are other things that you'll start to do as well. Because once you start to look at it and say, okay, this kid is in crisis and this kid really needs me. Think about when your children were young and they skinned their knee, right? The part of us that enjoys parenting, we weren't the ones that ran up to them and were like, well, why did you do that? And what happened? I bet you want to do it next time. And well, then I tell you, like, we don't do the lecturing when our kids get their knee. Right. We go straight into how do we help calm them down? How do we give them what they need? And so there's really not a timeline on how long it would take. I think that consistently is going to be important. Right. And if you have a more specific, like I said, like I know you said like 3 years. And so if that has been your, I call it the dance of dysfunction, if that's how y'all been dancing for 3 years, it's gonna be, it probably is gonna feel worse before it gets better. Because everybody has to learn how to do something totally different and have to learn how to respond in a different way. And so in all of this and working with families, one of the things that I did, I know Caitlin mentioned that I'm an author. So I did write a book about transforming behaviors and fostering adopted children from a compassionate approach. And in the book, I created what we call the heart framework. And so the heart framework is really like a roadmap, to say what are some things that we can do when we are dealing with these meltdown behaviors in the moment. Not if you spend 30 minutes with your kids every day, the behaviors are going to decrease, which is true. That's true. That's research based. Well, 30 minutes a week, but that's research based. But that's not what we're teaching. We're teaching when I'm in the room and I say, go get your clothes out for bed, and they start to screaming. What are the things that we do? So one of the things is being able to help with calmness. We can't help them if we're not calm. And they have to be able to they have to also be able to borrow our calm. And so we start with regulating ourselves and then we help regulate the child. Engaging with compassion just means that we get curious. We have to figure out if this, with me knowing that this child is in crisis, what are some things that I can do to help them get out of this crisis? But also assessing for triggers. What are some of the patterns that happen? What are some of the unmet needs? What are some of the stressors that they have that are going on that may be impacting the behavior that I'm seeing? Because can I tell y'all the truth? 9 times out of 10, asking a child to turn the video game off to go to bed and they start doing it's not about the video game. Let's just be honest. That's typically not the trigger. And sometimes it's not because they just want to do the thing that they want to do. Right. Sometimes there are other things going on. And so also giving them respectful choices and limits, which is having boundaries, is with connection, especially when there's some physical aggression involved, when they're hitting, kicking, throwing. I definitely tell parents all the time, I don't want you to think that using a heart framework means that we're ignoring these behaviors and just walking away and letting them do what they want to do. That's not what it is. And we also have to make sure that somebody's safe. That everybody's safe all the time. And so the other one is, and then the last one is take time to rest and reset. Because if you've ever dealt with a meltdown, I don't know about y'all, but I'm tired. I don't want to talk to you. I really don't want you to talk to me, right? I don't want you to come back and say, Mom, I'm sorry. Mama, next time do, like, I don't want to hear none of that because I'm tired, right? Like physically, emotionally drained with dealing with meltdowns. And that's just being 100% real and human, right? And so I think being able to understand that it's about once you rest and reset, one of the things I like to do is I like to say, hey, what went well? Because even though the meltdown might not end the way I wanted it to end, it might have lasted a little longer than I wanted to. Something went well, even if it's the fact that it's over now, right? That's a thing. Or another thing, thinking about what went well, is I know for me, sometimes it's I didn't lose my cool. You know, for me, sometimes that's because I tell people all the time I'm in recovery from yelling. I'm a yeller. And maybe it's because of how I was raised, but my first go-to is to yell. I don't know where that come from. So I have to be very intentional. I have to be very intentional so that I don't yell. And so also being able to look at what could we do better next time? And this may be the time where there may be some teaching involved, and that's where you say, hey, I noticed that you got really angry. And so anger is in itself, it's an okay emotion. But what are some things that we can do next time we get angry that don't include throwing things or yelling or doing all the other stuff? All right. So so this is where we're going to do the action. This is where you're going to need your worksheet. And so if you have a copy of the worksheet, that is perfect. This QR code should take you to the worksheet if you don't have a copy of it. And I'll give everybody a couple minutes, a few moments to get your worksheet out. Once you get your worksheet out, just tell me in the chat if you have your worksheets. And we'll get started with the worksheet. All right, we got some guidance. Okay. You got some guidance. So before we go into the worksheet, is there anybody that has a question about what we've already talked about behavior being communication, being able to transform or change the way we see behavior, with as behavior being a child that a meltdown being a child that's in crisis, and also understanding that we're responsible for our response. What is our response? What's the thing that we're doing? Because that's the only thing that we can ultimately control. Anybody have any questions about that before we meet Sarah and talk about what Sarah has going on? Okay. Well, if you have it, we do have time at the end for a question and answer, so we'll go through. So meet Sarah. And so the title is Everything in the Room is Fine. So this is not any specific child that I have worked with. This is just a scenario of situations that I have worked through either with other people's kids or my kids, right? So 10-year-old Sarah is told it's time to turn off the video game. Within seconds, the controller hits the wall, a shoe follows, then a lamp. She's yelling, I hate this house. How many times have we told our child that it's time to transition and do something else, and they just go all the way? You feel like, what? And then, especially when it's something like, turn the video game off and go to bed, because in your mind, you're like, we do this every day, Sarah. Like, you got to go to bed every day. What is really going on? And so I want you to put yourself in the position as Sarah's parent, right? Imagine that this has happened, so you feeling it yourself, your chest is tightening. You know the feeling, you know your body is reacting to what Sarah's doing. And if you're anything like me, my mind will instantly go to, girl, you don't even have to have a video game. Like, you should think about how how privileged you are, because everybody ain't got no video game. And you down there to throw the controller at the wall when I tell you to turn it off. Like, that's where my mind goes immediately sometimes. But thinking about wanting to yell, wanting to lecture, wanting to just say stop it, wanting to have that conversation with my kid that you don't even have to have a video game. But instead of doing that, what do we do to keep ourselves calm? Understanding that what is that's impacting my personal triggers? What is that behavior doing to me? Because, and that's how we keep ourselves calm. When this behavior happens, when you tell this child to stop and they throw the video game against the wall, what's that mean to me? How am I taking that personally? And how am I focusing on, how do I need to focus on how to calm myself down before I even respond to the kid? Right? Because, like I said, for me, some kids don't even have a video game. And for me, sometimes I feel like you're being disrespectful and you're being ungrateful and all these things, because having a video game is a privilege and you don't understand it. You don't understand that it's a privilege. Or you throwing a lamp. So what's going to happen when you don't have lights in your room? Then you're going to feel like, oh, I don't have all these things. But when you have them, you destroy them. And so all of those things are going through my head when I hear the things hit the wall as a parent, right? But the first step is helping with calmness. I have to own that. I have to own how this is feeling for me so that I can respond in a way that is, I can respond instead of react. And how I do that is understanding that in this moment, my job is de escalation. My job is not to teach Sarah about the importance of not throwing the controller. It's not to lecture her about what she should and shouldn't be doing. You know, hey, I need to figure out how I need to keep myself calm so that I can help her. So it doesn't one go to a bigger escalation. But if it does, my job is to de-escalate. And can I be honest with y'all? It's not perfect. I deal with this even as a parent, even working with parents. This is a conversation I have over and over and over and over. And it's not about it being perfection. It's about it being intentional. It's about taking a pause to say, okay, what is this coming up? What's coming up for me? And how can I address this for her? Right? So being able to take a short breath and choose how I want to respond. And so I want you to take a moment and I want you to think about that behavior for you. Maybe it's the one that you mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, or another one that you're thinking about now, right? When it happens, what happens in your body? What happens with your thoughts? And what happens with your feelings? Because we have to be able to understand that part in order for us to remain calm. The same coping skills that we're going to teach our children, we have to be able to borrow some of those too to keep ourselves calm. So I want you to think about that. The next one is, and so for us, how do we engage with compassion? So instead of yelling, that's enough. Cut it out. Learning to be able to get closer, but also keep the space. To keep the space that's needed. Because at this point, Sarah's already mad. She's already upset. She's already huffing and puffing. She ready for war. And y'all know when I say ready for war, y'all know what I mean. Sarah not backing down and Mama not backing down. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's like we've been taught I can't let an 8-year old or 10-year old control my house. So I can't let her think that what she did was okay and that she's going to get away with it. But what happens is when we do that, we're not coming from a place of compassion. We're actually coming from a place of control. So I want you to shift your mind from she's trying to control my house or she's just trying to have her way to saying, hey, Sarah's meltdown is a crisis, and I need to figure out how to help her through the crisis. That's the compassion part. That's the compassion part. There's something that she needs, and either she needs it from me or she needs it from herself, but we have to figure out what she needs. One thing that I do, and I teach other parents, especially in my home, when there's a big behavior, the first thing I think about is the environment. How is the environment adding to this behavior? And it doesn't have to be intentionally. My kids have a hard time. Personally, my kids have a hard time going to bed if I'm in the living room because for some reason they think if I'm up watching TV, they should be up watching TV too. Right? Anybody else deal with that? Like for my kids to go to bed without a meltdown, especially when they were little, everybody had to go to bed. So, like I'm telling my husband, go in the room and watch TV. Like they're not gonna, because they think that if the TV on, everybody should be up. But we had to learn that the hard way, the hard. I'm like, what is going on? And so, especially if you're anything like me and the other parent is like, I shouldn't have to be punished. Because when I was younger, my mama said go to bed, I went to bed. Well, baby, this ain't when you were younger. Just go to the room. Just go to the room and watch TV. I'll bring you a late night snack or something, but you gotta get out of here. So understanding that what do they need? And so being able to have a conversation or saying to them, hey, that was really frustrating. And it doesn't seem like you were ready to stop playing your game. And trying to be more compassionate and understanding doesn't mean that her throwing the controller was okay. It doesn't mean that her throwing the shoe was okay. It doesn't mean that her throwing the lamp was okay. But what I'm saying is, I don't have to agree with the behavior or give it an excuse to acknowledge the feeling, right? Acknowledge the feeling that was really frustrating, that you had to stop. And so I want you to take a moment and pause and reflect. I want you to think about, take a few moments to identify how often when we're dealing with the meltdown, and sometimes, especially with that behavior that we already know gets to us, where we jump straight to correction. Instead of being able to name the feeling or connecting with compassion, we jump straight to you shouldn't have done this, and that. Right? Think about that. How often do we do that? And so the next one is looking at how do we assess for triggers, right? Asking yourself, is this really about the game? Is this really about her having to stop? Is this really about control, her having the need to control? Or is this about fear? Is this about embarrassment? Has something else happened today? And just being able to remember things that might have happened today that might have led to that. Sometimes when our kids are dealing with meltdowns a lot, and they're dealing with meltdowns everywhere. I want you to imagine how many times they are corrected, they are yelled at, they are redirected in a day, right? From the bus driver telling them to sit down, from the cafeteria lady telling them to stop playing in the line, from the teachers all day, probably telling them all of the things because they're dealing with these things all day throughout the day. And then we get home and it's the same thing. The one time in the day where they feel like, hey, I get to play this video game, and now we're saying that has to stop. Right. And I'm not saying that we let them continue to play the video game because we understand all that. What I'm saying is because we understand all that, we get to change the way that we approach it and we get to change the way that we deal with it. Right. And so also remember that it wasn't about the game. It could have been that she had felt out of control all day because all of the things happened. But if we don't lean into that and try to help her figure it out, help her with that, then it becomes correction, 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 right? And somebody said learning to give countdowns and a visual timer definitely is helpful. And I have timers all over my house because we use timers. And I tell part of the reason we use timers is because do y'all ever have kids when y'all ask them to do something and they say yes ma'am, and then 45 minutes later it still ain't done. Okay, let me get you to do something. You're trying to be more approachable than your parents were. Because when my mama said, "Ma," she was expecting me to be up and in her face trying to figure out the rest of her sentence. Like that's how I was raised, right? And so we're trying to be more lenient, not lenient. We're trying to let our kids have more of a say, right? And so And so we use timers because I say, hey, I need this done. Set your timer for 45 minutes. I don't care if you keep playing your game for 40 minutes. When the 45-minute time goes up, I need the task done. And so that's how we do it. And I put the ball in their court and they have control over that. So when you think about that behavior, I want you to pause and reflect. What might be underneath the behavior that you're dealing with the most right now? And that behavior we talked about that might be that big behavior for you, what might be underneath it? If it's a child that's being defiant or a child that's being aggressive, what do you think that might mean more than just, I don't want to listen to anybody right now? Right? So thinking about that. And so also the other part, giving respectful choices and limits. So how do we do that? So the next one is being able to say, a lot of times because we go right into consequences, lectures, and all the things. But being able to, one of the limits that we said is if she is in a moment and she's throwing stuff, I would definitely go into the room and remove stuff that would be harmful to throw. And I would say, hey, I can't, Sarah, I understand that you're upset. I understand that you're frustrated. I can't let you throw these things. So I'm going to move them out the way so that everybody can be safe. Right? Being able to remove that without you, because sometimes we want to show our power and we want to show our control and we would do things in a different way. Right. So that's another, but not threatening them, not punishing it, like all the things, just setting a boundary, letting them know, this is what I'm expecting of you. We can't throw the things. We're not going to throw things. I'm going to take them away. I'm going to remove them out the room. Right. Even sometimes telling your kid, hey, and I told my kids, hey, I will give you a few minutes to finish your screaming, or whenever you're ready to talk about it. That's a bit. And my kids are older now. My kids are 13 and 12, right? So I will tell them, all the time, hey, you can take some moment to do your screaming or whatever you want to do, and when you're ready to talk, I'll talk. But I tell them, I can, I guess I'm a different type of parent because I tell my kids it's gonna be hard for me to talk to you while you're yelling because I'm trying not to yell. And if you're yelling at me, I'm gonna start back yelling at you, and then it's gonna be a problem. And they understand. My kids understand it, so we have that conversation. Hey, when you're done yelling, you come back and we'll have a conversation. And so I want you to think about for you, what usually happens at the height of your meltdown? What do you usually say? What are some things that when you're trying to give responses and you're trying to give choices and limits, what are some of the words that you usually use? And how can we change that to be more compassionate and be more in tune to what the child has going on versus what we have going on? And then after it's all said and done, being able to rest and reset. Like, what are some things that we can do and talk about? Saying, having a conversation like, hey, that was a lot. That it seemed like you had a lot going on and you just couldn't get it figured out in that moment. And so when you have something like that again, what can I do to help you? What do you need from me? I have one kid that's a hugger, right? And I can say, she could be in the middle of a meltdown. I say, "Do you want a hug?" And at this point, it's like in a joking manner, and she literally will stop and say, "Yes, ma'am." Right? I got another one, baby. If you touch her, it's gonna escalate her even more. She hates hugging, and so for her, that doesn't work. And her when she is having her meltdown moments, she doesn't see the joke as a joke. So she's not the one to joke with, right? So thinking about that too. So what's really going on underneath? And being able to reconnect, right? So I want us to, was that helpful for everybody to walk through kind of that scenario? I do have a couple of questions. I'm gonna ask these questions before we go to the next slide. Yep. Having a parent that's critical and was a yeller is definitely parts of the things that we have to unlearn because we feel like that was we have to unlearn that because we know that that's not what we want, but sometimes there's that part that feels like but it worked because we didn't it worked in the sense of when we went to the store, my parents didn't have to worry about getting embarrassed by us because we already knew what was going to happen, and so we acted accordingly, right? And how do you support a child and parent healing from childhood trauma? That is a big one. There is actually I do a presentation on healing from childhood where it talks about how when we have childhood trauma and we're trying to teach our children in a different system, in a different way, how do we heal ourselves from those things as we're trying to raise our own kids? Because when I tell people I'm in recovery from yelling, I grew up in a household that where we were yellers. Like, we got yelled at for, I feel like, everything. They might not feel like it was everything, but it was everything. And so we're walking around on eggshells because we don't want to make somebody mad, because we don't want to get in trouble. And so I'm learning I have to let that go for my kids. And I have to realize um, that those are the things that are going on. Right. Okay. All right. So the next thing I want us to do is I want us to take a few moments to assess our triggers. If anybody wants to share, for like what comes up for them, we talked about what is the behavior that feels hardest to respond to, right? And we talked about that. We had a behavior in the beginning. If it's the same behavior, that's fine. If it's a different behavior, that's fine too. So thinking about it for you, I think for me, I can deal with the yelling and screaming. I feel like I have like a block or something. Like, I can deal with that. I told y'all 30 minutes and 32 seconds I could deal with it. No, 32 minutes and 31 seconds I could deal with it. After 32 minutes and 32 seconds, I'm done. Like, somebody gonna have to tag me out. Right? But for me, the hardest behavior sometimes, it's not even an eye roll. It's this thing that my daughter does when she turns around from me. And it's like, I'll allow my kids to walk away when they need to, because I get to walk away. Right? I allow them to walk away, but there's something about this little turn she got when she walks away. It's a trigger for me. And I have to know that, because she's not doing anything different or anything intentional, but it's the way that I take it. And so I have to make sure I can keep myself calm when that thing happens. And that's how I like exploring your personal feelings and thoughts about it, especially when it comes to a child that is destroying property or being disrespectful. How many of us think about, like, the holidays just passed, right? So how many of us went above and beyond for our kids to get them everything on the list that they said they wanted? I mean, everything. And then the day after Christmas, you ask them to clean their room and they lost their mind. And you thinking, girl, I throw every one of them toys in the garbage. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's be honest. It's like, I know I didn't just spend my money on it. And I'm telling you, be like, my money. I just spent my money on you. And I asked you to clean your room. Or my girls are into like lip glosses and stuff and like facial care and all that kind of stuff. And they'll leave it in the bathroom. And when I say, hey, go clean your stuff up out the bathroom, then they get an attitude. You know what? I won't buy you none next month. That's what I want to say. This will be the last time you'll have face cleaner in my house, right? Because that's what it feels like. But I realize those are my personal feelings and my thoughts that are showing up, because for some reason, we've been trained that children should be more grateful, and they should. And we're not asking them to roll out the red carpet when we come home and, clapping and say, not to make the Jennifer Hudson tunnel or anything, but I really did make all your dreams come true for Christmas, right? I really did give you everything you wanted for your birthday. So if I ask you to clean your room, I kind of want the room clean without having to fight about it. Because sometimes I be wanting to have a conversation with my kids, like, and some kids don't even have their own room. And you don't even want to clean yours up. And so those are things that come up for me. But I have to also think about what's beneath the behavior. Because my kids are not, and when I think about it, for most kids, it's not just because they want to do what they want to do. Especially with these video games, sometimes they're just in a zone, or they're just in a certain part of the game. They don't want to stop at the moment. And I think that's why it's important to know that. And I know one person said that when it comes to transitions, like, hey, we have about this much time left, right? So they can start getting ready for it's time. And like when it's bedtime, hey, we have about this, we have about 30 more minutes before bedtime. I realize for some kids, like if your kid one thing that has helped, I had a parent, the child had a hard time with bedtime. And what she did was the 30 minutes before bedtime was their time, kind of like their time to spend together. And if she got on the couch and turned on a show, like a Disney show or something, before that 30-minute show was over, the kid was knocked out asleep. And she would take the kid, she would say, hey, go get in the bed, they will get in the bed. But if you tried to make them go to bed while everybody else is still up doing stuff, like the youngest kid, oh, it was they weren't gonna do it because they feel like everybody else is still up, so I should be up. And then thinking for yourself, what is a common technique that you can use to address that behavior when it comes up for you? Right? It might be deep breathing. The reality is sometimes it might be walking away. And my kids are old. I keep saying my kids are older. But when kids are older, you can say, hey, Mama gonna take a break. I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna take me a 5-10 minute break. I'll be back. But you can say the same thing to your younger kids too, because what it does is it teaches them that they can take a break too. If you're gonna take a break, definitely allow them to be able to take a break if they need to. And sometimes we have to remind them, hey, I'm gonna let you take a break because you might need to. I'm gonna let you go take a break. Yeah, let me put myself in timeout. And so some of the common mistakes is that we take behavior personally. We think that they're doing it against us. All the things that I do, as hard as I work, and you won't even wash the dishes or whatever the case may be. So we're taking it personally. Or, you know, you ever had a kid that had a meltdown after they had a long, fun day? And like you take them somewhere, y'all spend all this money and y'all had a fun day, and then you get home and they just melting down. And you're like, I never take you to Chuck E. Cheese again. Like, you'll be 30 before we go to Chuck E. Cheese again. Because that's what we're related to. But really thinking about what is the behavior communicating? What is it going on? Because they could be tired. They could be overstimulated. All the things could be happening. And we have to be able to say, okay, maybe that's what's going on. How can we do something different? Focusing on the behavior, not the need. Sometimes we do that. We will focus on the behavior and not what they need. And so how do we shift that is that we know now that we need to be more compassionate to their crisis. This child is in crisis. This meltdown is a cry for help, as you might say. So what is it that I need to do? And then reacting to their triggers, right? Reacting to your triggers. Because my kid saying something to me that I take as disrespectful, I'm going to respond as if I've been disrespected instead of saying, what does she need? It's hard having two girls who are very as vocal as you are. I'm gonna say that, who have learned to be as vocal as you are, and so and they're thinking that we're having conversations, and sometimes I'm in the mood for it. Sometimes I just want you to do the thing I asked you to do. Like, that's just me being human. Sometimes we can have dialogue about why you don't want to wash the dishes right now, but today ain't it. I just need you to get the dishes washed. And so being able to me identifying that I need to, instead of responding to my trigger being tired and all the things, I need to be able to respond to their need. What is she needing right now? What is this child needing from me when they are kicking and screaming on the floor because you asked them to go to bed? Like, what is that thing? And so remembering that everything, we still here, y'all. We still rocking and rolling, and it has not been easy, but we are definitely still here. And our presence is more powerful than a perfect response. I guarantee you, every time, parenting is not perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, and even people who are giving you ideas about what you should be doing and what is work, what doesn't work, and what does work, that's trial and error. And that specifically may not work with your kids. And you have to be able to understand that too. And when they're having a meltdown, how can we connect with them? Right. And so I'm going to put this. So I have this. I would love for you all to be able to give me feedback on the presentation or anything you need. But also, you can scan that QR code to get the feedback. But this is the opportunity for if anybody has any questions, so I can potentially give you some answers. I know we are right at our hour, but I do have time to do the question and answer. If anybody has any questions. Any questions? What we got?
I will unmute you, Janelle. Just give me 1 second. There you go. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, hi.
Hey, Janelle.
Hey, so I have two children who are on the spectrum. The oldest is level 2, the second oldest is level 1, and she's the one that is very difficult. And part of my problem is I've heard a while ago that when a child acts up, the feelings that you feel inside are exactly what are mirroring what they're feeling. They just can't express it. So, like with this defiance thing, the first few things that come to mind is maybe confusion and autonomy, stripped from them because it's like, well, what do you mean I can't do this? Or what do you mean I can't touch this? Just so when I'm trying to figure this out, and sometimes I like forget myself and I just turn into my mother at times, but on the
Mhm.
times where I'm really trying to ground myself and be like, stay calm, there's a reason for this. And I try to ask them, like, what is it that you need? What's really going on? They don't have the neurotypical words to describe, or half the time I'm getting I don't know responses. Am I just supposed to mind read until time age goes on, or am I like, how do I kind of sit there go, oh, you need this or you need that, if they're just like they don't have the language for that? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Uh-huh. And the thing is, it's not going to come from the words because even if they're not on the spectrum, developmentally, children
Right.
don't have the words to say what's wrong with them. And if you think about it, we know a lot of adults who can't do it either. Like we know a lot of adults that can't say, "Hey, this is really frustrating me." So I don't want you to think that you're looking for a particular word or words to say, especially when your kids are on the spectrum because they may never form the language. So I want you to think of in terms more behaviorally. So when the things happen and being able to go into it saying, it seems because part of what we're doing is we're giving them the language as well. It seems like that frustrated you, or it seems like you may be upset about that. Like you're really being curious. And kids are gonna say no. That's not, no. Like they'll say no in a minute or let you know that no, I wasn't frustrated, I wasn't angry. And so I would definitely start from that place of it seems like you are frustrated. It seems like you're angry. It seems like you're trying to explain something to me that mama is just not understanding. And being able to take it from that perspective because it lets them know that y'all are trying to figure it out together versus you're just telling them what to do. And then the thing about it is when they are yes, I feel like internally what we're feeling is there, and our feelings are valid too, but our feelings also come from, if we're being honest, it comes from our childhood, our upbringing. It comes from society telling us how we should be a parent. It comes from the doctors telling us what our kids are never going to be able to do. It comes from grieving what we thought parenthood was. I as a mom, I thought I was gonna be the one who was gonna be baking chocolate chip cookies on a random Thursday night and having a fresh baked dessert every week. Baby, me and my kids can't do desserts together because they don't follow the recipe, and that irks me. So that's not me. And sometimes I get really sad, like I wish I could bake cookies with y'all, but y'all not ready for that yet. And so, but that's being honest with ourselves about what it is that we need. So I think that the things that you are doing, being able to, they may not have the words to say it back, but you'll start noticing when you get it right. When I say get it right, you'll start noticing when something happens, and then it shifts kind of how they respond, and you shift how you respond, and then you'll learn how to dance differently with each other, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you for that. Anybody else?
Um, Looks like Mercedes has a question. Mercedes, I allowed your mic, so if you just want to unmute yourself.
Um, I have a kiddo on the spectrum too. I guess it's more of a response than a question. He's 7, and he can be very articulate sometimes, but he has a lot of like once he gets sensory overload or overwhelmed, he just shuts down and he can get loud or violent, and he can't slow himself down quick enough to really like stop himself from doing things, especially at school. But when he was younger, my thing was I would just sit on the ground with him, and I'd be like, I don't know what's going on. And I just look at him and be like, I don't know what's going on. And he would just look at me like I'm supposed to know everything. And even though he didn't quite he and then he'd be like, I don't, I could see his little thoughts go, and he'd be like, I don't know what's going on either. And he'd end up just sitting down with me, and then we both just be on the ground together, staring at each other like, okay, now what? So I don't know if that's like a, with kids who are on the spectrum thing. I know it's different across the board, but literally just getting grounded and showing them like, hey, I'm not mad, I'm not anything. I'm just gonna sit down and be on the level with you, not knowing what's going on. And I found that to be like a really big help in de-escalating when he was younger.
Yeah. And thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that, Mercedes. Because really, what that is that actually is like that help with calmness. You are loaning your calm to him, like when he was getting agitated. So the fact that you were getting, on ground level with him and just being there with him is one, is teaching regulation, but also it's co-regulation is what we call it because you're lending him your calm. Because imagine if that was happening and you were getting upset. He would not be calming down, right? And so you learn how to do that in a way that was safe and it worked for him. So yeah. And a lot of times we do things like that as parents and we get really creative and we don't think that it makes sense until it makes sense. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have any questions?
I think we had a couple more in the chat. And Megan, I know we're over time, so if answer the ones that you have time
Oh,
for.
that's fine. Let me see what we got. I have one? How do you learn to change from a control response to be compassionate? And how do you learn not to yell? Honestly, my change from control to compassion came when I realized that my kiddo was in crisis. Like, and I think about it, if somebody was on fire, my response wouldn't be to, well, why did you get it on fire? And why did you do this? And what happened? And if you don't get yourself off fire, then all these things are gonna happen. And I realized that there were moments that she really just needed me. She didn't need me to solve the problem for her. And that's what happened in that bathroom. She didn't need me to solve the problem. She didn't need me to have the answer. She just needed me. And so a lot of times when I'm working with families, and hearing the same conversations and things over and over, and it just created a theme, and that sometimes kids just need us to be there and want to help them. But that came from changing the way I look at it because if we always feel like our child is doing something to us or we're taking it personally or we're feeling like, oh, they just don't want to follow the rules, we're not as open to helping and supporting them. Other than if we just think, okay, this person just really needs me right now. But it is a struggle because I'm a yeller. I'm a yeller, and I'm gonna say I got that from my mama. She probably ain't gonna see this, but I'm gonna say I got it from her. But I'm trying not to be a yeller. So now she's older, she don't yell, and now it just look like we the outliers, right? Because now grandmama don't yell, but mama was a yeller. So yeah, definitely trying to figure that out. And for me, I take a break. I'm gonna take me a deep breath. I'm gonna just sit there and give you a stare for a moment or something before I respond because my natural is just to it's just a yeah. I don't know. But I've been working on it really hard. So sometimes that's my goal for the day. Sometimes my intention for the day is to not yell. No matter what's going on when I get home, like when I get home tonight, no matter what's going on, I'm not gonna yell. If the dish is not washed, if bath's not taken, it's fine. We'll get it figured out. With big emotions or behaviors, when should I step in versus let them work it out? I guess it depends on what you mean by working it out. Because sometimes I think us stepping in if we look at it as not us stepping in to try to change anything, we're just stepping in to be a support. We are there to be a support, and so that's helpful to know that. Um, a lot of times they can't work it out because they don't have the skills to work it out, and a lot of times they don't understand. They don't even understand what's going on. So I think just kind of being there with them and being a support to them is what helps them work it out, right? For a kid to know that I can have this meltdown and then tomorrow you're still gonna love me is the best thing in the world that we can do for them. Is to let them know that, you know, we all make mistakes, but I'm still gonna love you tomorrow and it's still gonna be okay. Um, and consistent, the way that I stay consistent without being too rigid is I question my why when it comes to rules and things in my house. Because a lot of stuff we just say no, 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 no. And I used to think that we were building character. Like, and I had to ask myself one day, and I think it was in Walmart. And my kids asked for something. The first thing I said was no. And I asked myself, well, why are you saying no? Is there a reason behind the no? Or is it just part of, you know, we just say no sometimes, a lot as parents. And so I give my kids a lot of time, a lot of opportunity to create the environment without saying no all the time. And so thinking about what is that discipline, what's the reason why? Like when I have this rule in my house, what is it? What is the a lot of times it'll be character building or we want them to be respectable people. And I try to think about other ways that could happen. And makes me think about, I don't know if anybody's read Michelle Obama's book Becoming, but in the book she talked about her mom would fix her eggs in the morning for breakfast, but she didn't like eggs. And then she asked her mom, why, well, why do I have to eat the eggs? And I'm like, well, you need protein. And so she was able to not convince, but she explained to her mom that peanut butter had just as much protein as eggs. And so when she explained that, her mom allowed her to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every morning instead of eating scrambled eggs. And the reality is that's how we do parenting a lot. A lot of times is I need you to eat the eggs because I said eat the eggs. But the reality is, what is it that the eggs are doing? It's providing you some nutrients. It's has something put some on your stomach in the morning, and you need more protein. But the reality is, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich gave her the same protein. And so I want you to think about that when you think about some of your rules and rules that we have, and some of those unwritten rules. What are they there for? And if our child has another way of being able to get that same level of character building, does it have to be with scrambled eggs? Or could it be with peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Michelle Obama's book is Becoming. It was her book Becoming. Yep, Becoming by, and that's what she talked about eggs versus peanut butter. So thank you all so much. Caitlin has my email address, and if you have any questions, I can put my email address here. I always say that and forget to tell y'all. But if you have a question, you can always email me. Now it might take me a day or two to email you back, but I'll get your email back. Mhm. Okay, so that's my email address. If anybody wants to email me, um,
Thank you. Thank you so much
thank
for
you,
that.
thank y'all so much.
Yeah, and anybody else who has questions, feel free to email me certificates. We can give out PDFs of the slides if that'll be helpful. Anything like that, go ahead and shoot me an email and I will get through those tomorrow morning/afternoon. So thank you, Megan, so much for being here
Thank
with
you.
us. And thank you all for being here. Have a great evening, everyone.
All right, thank y'all. Bye.